The London Central Criminal Court buzzed with tension as one of the most controversial cases of the decade was about to begin. Outside the imposing courthouse, protesters held signs demanding justice, while media crews from around the world prepared their cameras for what many expected to be a landmark trial. At the center of the controversy was Lord Geoffrey Blackwood, one of Britain's most powerful politicians and a close advisor to the Prime Minister. The 58-year-old aristocrat stood accused of corruption, accepting millions in bribes from foreign governments, and using his position to influence government policies for personal gain. If convicted, he faced 20 years in prison and the complete destruction of his family's centuries-old reputation. Blackwood had hired the most expensive legal team money could buy. His lead attorney, Victoria Sterling, is known throughout London as the Iron Lady of Law, a brilliant lawyer who had never lost a major case. She commanded fees of thousands of pounds per hour and had a reputation for destroying witnesses on cross-examination. Presiding over the case was Judge Harrison Whitmore, a stern 65-year-old man known for his strict adherence to legal procedure and his intolerance for any disruption in his courtroom. Judge Whitmore had served on the bench for 30 years and took pride in running the most orderly trials in the British legal system. His word was absolute law within his courtroom, and he had never hesitated to hold anyone in contempt, regardless of their status or position. The prosecution's case seemed strong on the surface. They had bank records showing suspicious payments, recorded phone conversations, and testimony from several government officials. But Blackwood's defense team had systematically attacked each piece of evidence, claiming it was circumstantial at best and fabricated at worst. As the trial entered its third week, the prosecution was struggling. Key witnesses had mysteriously changed their testimony. Crucial evidence had been ruled inadmissible on technical grounds, and Victoria Sterling was making the prosecution look incompetent. With her aggressive tactics, sitting quietly in the public gallery was a man who had watched every moment of the proceedings with intense interest. James Mitchell was 45 years old with the bearing and alertness that marked him as former military. He wore a simple dark suit, but those with trained eyes could see the discipline in his posture and the watchfulness in his gaze. James had served for 15 years as a member of the elite Royal Guard, protecting the royal family from threats, both foreign and domestic. His service record was impeccable, decorated with commendations for bravery and dedication. But what brought him to this courtroom was deeply personal. Lord Blackwood's corruption had directly resulted in the death of James's younger brother, a soldier who had been killed when Blackwood sold military intelligence to hostile forces. The evidence James possessed could bring down Lord Blackwood completely. During his time protecting a minor royal at a private estate, James had accidentally overheard and recorded conversations between Blackwood and foreign agents. The recordings were crystal clear, showing Blackwood not only accepting bribes, but actively planning to betray British military positions. James had tried to present this evidence through proper channels, but Blackwood's influence ran deep. Police investigators had been reassigned. Government officials had refused to meet with him. His own military superiors had ordered him to stay silent or face court-martial. The corruption reached so high that James realized the only way to get justice was to present the evidence directly in court. The problem was that James's evidence had been obtained without a warrant and in circumstances that might make it inadmissible. But he was determined to find a way to present it, even if it meant sacrificing his own freedom and reputation. As the morning session began, the prosecution called their final witness, a nervous accountant who had handled some of Blackwood's financial transactions. Victoria Sterling immediately objected to every question, turning what should have been damaging testimony into a confusing mess of legal technicalities. James watched from the gallery, his jaw clenched with frustration as he saw justice being manipulated by expensive lawyers and corrupt influence. During the lunch recess, James made his decision. He approached the prosecution team in the hallway, hoping to speak with the lead prosecutor, Sarah Chen, a dedicated woman who had built her career fighting corruption. "Ms. Chen," James said quietly, "I have evidence that could change this entire case. Evidence that proves Lord Blackwood's guilt beyond any doubt." Sarah looked at him with tired eyes. 3 weeks of legal battles had worn her down, and she had received dozens of calls from people claiming to have evidence against Blackwood. Most turned out to be conspiracy theorists or attention seekers. Sir, appreciate your interest in justice, but we're in the middle of trial proceedings. If you have evidence, but Blackwood's influence blocked me at every turn. Police investigators were transferred, government officials refused to see me, and my military superiors threatened me with court-martial if I spoke out. Something in James's voice made Sarah pause. She had heard similar stories from other potential witnesses who had mysteriously disappeared or changed their testimony. The pattern suggested a widespread cover-up that reached deep into the British establishment. What kind of evidence? She asked cautiously. James pulled out a small digital recorder from his jacket pocket. Audio recordings of Lord Blackwood accepting bribes and providing classified military information to foreign agents. Conversations that directly resulted in the death of British soldiers, including my brother. Sarah's eyes widened. If authentic, such evidence would be devastating to Blackwood's defense. But she also knew the legal complications involved. These recordings, how were they obtained? Were you authorized to make them? I was protecting a member of the royal family at a private estate. Blackwood thought he was safe from surveillance, but I recorded everything as part of my security protocols. The recordings are completely authentic. Before Sarah could respond further, Victoria Sterling appeared in the hallway, flanked by 2 of Blackwood's security guards. The defense attorney had been watching James carefully since the trial began. Recognizing him as a potential threat to her client, Miss Chen, Victoria said with her characteristic cold smile, I hope you're not considering any desperate last-minute theatrics. The court has very strict rules about evidence presentation. Any attempt to introduce unauthorized materials could result in a mistrial. The threat was clear. Victoria knew that James had evidence, and she was warning the prosecution not to use it. Her client's money and influence had already corrupted so much of the system that she felt confident she could block any new evidence. Furthermore, Victoria continued, my client's security team has informed me that this man has been making threatening statements about Lord Blackwood. Perhaps he should be removed from the courthouse entirely for everyone's safety. James felt his military training kick in as he assessed the situation. He was outnumbered and outmaneuvered legally, but he had faced worse odds during his service. The key was timing and strategy. When the afternoon session resumed, James sat in the gallery, the digital recorder hidden in his jacket pocket. He watched as Victoria Sterling continued her systematic destruction of the prosecution's case, objecting to every piece of evidence and confusing every witness with legal technicalities. The accountant on the witness stand was clearly intimidated, changing his earlier testimony and claiming he couldn't remember crucial details. Judge Whitmore grew increasingly impatient with the prosecution's inability to present a coherent case. As the witness stepped down, Sarah Chen stood to address the court. Your Honor, the prosecution has one final piece of evidence to present. Evidence that will prove conclusively that Lord Blackwood. Objection, Your Honor. The prosecution cannot introduce new evidence at this stage of the trial. They have had months to prepare their case. Judge Whitmore's expression darkened. He prided himself on running efficient trials, and he was already annoyed by the prosecution's seemingly weak performance. Ms. Chen, you know perfectly well that evidence must be presented during the appropriate phase of trial. You cannot simply produce mystery evidence whenever your case is failing. James knew this was his moment. Standing up in the gallery, he called out clearly, Your Honor, I have audio recordings that prove Lord Blackwood's guilt. Recordings of him accepting bribes and betraying British soldiers. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Journalists frantically scribbled notes, spectators gasped in shock, and Lord Blackwood's face went pale as he recognized James from their previous encounters at royal functions. Victoria. Sterling immediately began shouting objections while her client whispered urgently in her ear, Judge. Whitmore's gavel came down like a thunderclap. Order in my courtroom. His voice boomed across the chamber, instantly silencing the crowd. His face was red with anger at the disruption of his carefully controlled proceedings. Sir. Judge Whitmore addressed James with icy authority. You are in contempt of court. This is a court of law, not a public forum for wild accusations. Bailiff, remove this man immediately and hold him in custody. James remained standing as the bailiff approached. Your Honor, I am James Mitchell, former Royal Guard. Service number RG4471. I have sworn an oath to protect Crown and country, and Lord Blackwood's crimes threaten both. This evidence must be heard. I don't care if you're the Queen's personal bodyguard, Judge Whitmore snapped. You will not disrupt my courtroom with unauthorized outbursts. The proper channels exist for presenting evidence. You have chosen to ignore them. Victoria Sterling saw her opportunity and pressed her advantage. Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate attempt by the prosecution to salvage their failing case through theatrical disruption. I move for an immediate mistrial based on prosecutorial misconduct. Lord Blackwood smiled smugly from the defense table. Once again, his money and influence were protecting him from justice. He had survived political scandals, government investigations, and media exposures. One ex-soldier with unauthorized recordings would not bring him down. As the bailiffs moved to escort James from the courtroom, he made one final attempt. Judge Whitmore, Lord Blackwood's corruption led to the death of my brother and 12 other British soldiers in Afghanistan. These recordings prove he sold military intelligence to hostile forces. Justice demands that you hear this evidence. But Judge Whitmore was unmoved by the emotional plea. Mr. Mitchell, your service to the Crown is noted and respected, but this court operates under the rule of law, not the rule of emotion. You have disrupted legal proceedings and shown contempt for judicial authority. Bailiff, remove him now. As James was escorted from the courtroom, he caught Sarah Chen's eye and nodded slightly toward his jacket pocket. The prosecutor understood somehow she needed to find a legal way to introduce the recordings James carried. Outside the courtroom, James was processed for contempt charges and held in a detention cell in the courthouse basement. But his years of Royal Guard training had taught him to prepare for multiple contingencies. What no one knew was that James had made copies of all his evidence and hidden them in various locations around London. More importantly, James had spent weeks studying legal precedents and court procedures. He had identified a specific legal loophole that might allow his evidence to be presented, but timing would be crucial. In the courtroom, Victoria Sterling continued her motion for mistrial. Your Honor, the prosecution has clearly orchestrated this disruption to prejudice the jury against my client. No fair trial can proceed after such obvious misconduct. Judge Whitmore considered the motion carefully. A mistrial would mean starting the entire process over again, wasting months of court time and taxpayer money. But he also couldn't allow his courtroom to become a circus of unauthorized testimony and dramatic outbursts. Ms. Sterling, while I agree that the disruption was inappropriate, I believe this trial can continue fairly. The jury will disregard the outburst from the gallery, and I will instruct them that unauthorized statements have no bearing on their deliberations. Sarah. Chen breathed a sigh of relief. The trial would continue, giving her time to find a way to legally present James's evidence. But she knew she was running out of options. And Victoria. Sterling's defense was systematically destroying every piece of evidence the prosecution presented. Meanwhile, in his detention cell, James was making a phone call using his one permitted contact. But he wasn't calling a lawyer or family member. Instead, he was calling a very specific number that connected him to someone with the authority to override certain legal restrictions. This is James Mitchell. Royal Guard Service Number RG4471. Calling under emergency protocol? 7. I need to speak with Director Harrison. Immediately, Emergency Protocol 7 was a rarely used provision. That allowed former Royal Guards to contact intelligence services directly when matters of national security were involved. It bypassed normal channels and granted temporary authority to act outside standard legal restrictions. The voice on the other end of the phone was crisp and professional. Mitchell, what's your situation? And this better be genuine national security, not personal revenge. Director Michael Harrison of MI6 listened carefully as James explained the situation. Harrison had worked with James during several high-security operations and knew him to be absolutely trustworthy and professional. If James was invoking Emergency Protocol 7, the situation was genuinely serious. James, you're telling me that Lord Blackwood has been selling military intelligence to foreign agents, and you have recordings to prove it? Affirmative, sir. The recordings clearly show Blackwood accepting payment for troop movement information that directly led to the ambush that killed my brother's unit. But the corruption goes deeper. He's been providing classified information to at least 3 different hostile governments. Director Harrison felt his blood run cold. Lord Blackwood had access to some of Britain's most sensitive military and intelligence operations. Through his government position, if he had been selling information to foreign agents, the damage to national security could be catastrophic. James, I need you to listen carefully. Under Emergency Protocol 7, I'm authorizing you to present your evidence through special channels. Someone will be coming to get you within the hour. Back in the courtroom, the trial was winding down for the day. Victoria Sterling had successfully blocked or discredited nearly every piece of prosecution evidence, and Lord Blackwood was looking increasingly confident about his chances of acquittal. Sarah Chen made one last desperate attempt to delay proceedings. Your Honor, the prosecution requests a brief recess to review some procedural matters. Judge Whitmore checked his watch impatiently. Ms. Chen, you've had weeks to prepare this case. I will not grant delays simply because your presentation has been inadequate. We will reconvene tomorrow morning for closing arguments. As the court session ended, Lord Blackwood approached Victoria Sterling with satisfaction. Excellent work, Victoria. By tomorrow evening, I'll be a free man. We can proceed with our other business arrangements. Victoria nodded professionally, but privately she felt uneasy. She had built her career on winning cases through legal skill, not by helping criminals escape justice. Blackwood's obvious guilt bothered her, but the money he paid was too good to refuse. What neither Blackwood nor his lawyer knew was that Director Harrison had already set wheels in motion that would change everything. Within MI6, Blackwood's name had triggered several security alerts. Computer analysts were now cross-referencing his activities with various intelligence. Breaches over the past 5 years, the results were damning. Every major security leak, every compromised operation, every intelligence failure could be traced back to information that Blackwood had access to. The man wasn't just corrupt, he was a traitor who had caused the deaths of dozens of British agents and soldiers. An hour later, James was surprised when his cell door opened and a woman in a business suit entered. She was in her 40s, with the professional demeanor of a senior government official. Mr. Mitchell. I'm Deputy Director Sarah Williams from MI6. Director Harrison has briefed me on your situation. Under the National Security Act, I'm authorizing the immediate presentation of your evidence under special judicial protocols. James looked confused. Ma'am, I don't understand. Judge Whitmore threw me out for contempt. How can I present evidence when I'm banned from the courtroom? Deputy Director Williams smiled grimly. Mr. Mitchell, when matters of national security are involved, certain legal procedures can be overridden. Judge Whitmore is about to receive some very interesting information about Lord Blackwood that will change his perspective dramatically. She handed James an official document with multiple government seals. This is a national security authorization. It grants you the right to present evidence directly to the court under special circumstances. Judge Whitmore will be required to hear your testimony, regardless of previous contempt rulings. James read the document carefully. It was unlike anything he had seen before, a direct order from the highest levels of government that overrode normal legal procedures when national security was threatened. Ma'am, what about the legal technicalities? Victoria Sterling will argue that my recordings were obtained illegally. That's been taken care of, Williams replied. Your recordings were made while you were performing official security duties for the Crown. Under the Royal Protection Act, such recordings are considered official government documents when they reveal threats to national security. Within the next 2 hours, Judge Whitmore received a phone call that would change the entire trajectory of the trial. The call came from the Lord Chief Justice himself, the highest judicial authority in England. Judge Whitmore, came the grave voice of Lord Chief Justice Sir Edmund Hartwell. You are to receive an emergency briefing regarding the Blackwood case. This matter now involves national security at the highest levels. Judge Whitmore felt a chill run down his spine. In 30 years on the bench, he had never received such a call. "Sir, what exactly are you telling me?" "Harrison, MI6, has provided evidence that Lord Blackwood has been engaged in treason, not merely corruption. The defendant has been selling classified military intelligence to foreign agents, resulting in the deaths of British servicemen. A former royal guard has evidence that must be presented to your court immediately." Judge Whitmore's mind reeled. The man he had thrown out of his courtroom for contempt was carrying evidence of treason, one of the most serious crimes in British law, sir. The individual in question disrupted my courtroom and showed contempt for judicial procedure. "I cannot simply overlook such behavior, Harrison," the Lord Chief Justice said firmly. "When the security of the realm is at stake, certain procedures must be adapted. You will receive a national security authorization within the hour. This document will require you to hear the evidence regardless of previous contempt rulings." That evening, as London settled into darkness, emergency meetings were taking place across the government. The Prime Minister was briefed on the full extent of Blackwood's betrayal. An authorization was given for the most sensitive intelligence to be declassified for court presentation. Meanwhile, Victoria Sterling was enjoying an expensive dinner at one of London's most exclusive restaurants, celebrating what she believed would be another legal victory. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Lord Blackwood. "Tomorrow we celebrate properly. Justice has been bought and paid for as usual." Victoria smiled as she read the message. But her satisfaction was interrupted by an urgent call from her law firm's senior partner, Victoria. "We need to talk immediately. Something has happened with the Blackwood case. Emergency government briefings, national security protocols being invoked. You need to get back to the office now." The confident smile faded from Victoria's face. In her experience, late-night government interventions usually meant very bad news for her clients. By midnight, Lord Blackwood was pacing nervously in his mansion, unable to sleep. His powerful connections had always protected him before, but something felt different this time. Phone calls to his government contacts went unanswered, and his usual sources of information had gone silent. Early the next morning, Judge Whitmore arrived at the courthouse to find unprecedented security measures in place. MI6 agents were stationed throughout the building, and government officials in dark suits filled the hallways. On his desk was the national security authorization that Deputy Director Williams had promised. The document was signed by the Lord Chief Justice, the Home Secretary, and the Prime Minister himself. Judge Whitmore had never seen such high-level authorization for court proceedings. The document was clear. James Mitchell was to be granted immediate access to present evidence under national security protocols. All previous contempt charges were suspended, and the court was required to hear his testimony regardless of normal procedural restrictions. When the court session began, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Lord Blackwood entered looking haggard and nervous, while Victoria Sterling appeared unusually subdued after her midnight briefing about the case's new national security dimensions. The gallery was packed with government officials, military officers, and intelligence personnel, people who rarely appeared in public courtrooms, but whose presence indicated the case's extraordinary importance. Judge Whitmore called the court to order with unusual solemnity. "Ladies and gentlemen, this court has received authorization from the highest levels of government to hear additional evidence in this case. Evidence that may have significant implications for national security." Victoria Sterling immediately stood to object. "Your Honor, the defense was not notified of any new evidence. We demand to know what procedural irregularities are being imposed on this trial." "Ms. Sterling," Judge Whitmore replied gravely, "under the National Security Act, certain evidence may be presented without prior notice when the security of the realm is at stake. You will have full opportunity to cross-examine, but the evidence will be heard." Lord Blackwood whispered urgently to his lawyer. But Victoria could only shake her head helplessly. Her expensive legal training hadn't prepared her for national security interventions that overrode normal court procedures. Judge Whitmore then did something that surprised everyone in the courtroom. "Will James Mitchell please return to these proceedings? Mr. Mitchell? Your contempt charges are hereby suspended under government authorization. You are requested to present your evidence to this court." The courtroom doors opened. James walked in flanked by two MI6 agents. carrying a briefcase of evidence that would change everything. As James approached the witness stand, Lord Blackwood's composure finally cracked. The powerful politician who had controlled government policy for decades now looked like a cornered animal. His face pale and his hands trembling as he realized his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. James was sworn in with unusual ceremony, taking an oath not just to tell the truth, but to uphold national security protocols during his testimony. Deputy Director Williams sat in the front row, ready to intervene if any classified information beyond the authorized scope was mentioned. "Mr. Mitchell," Sarah Chen began, her voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstances, "please tell the court about your background and how you came to possess evidence regarding Lord Blackwood's activities." James spoke clearly and professionally, describing his 15 years of Royal Guard service, his security clearances, and his assignment to protect minor royals at various private estates and functions. "During the summer of 2023, I was assigned to provide security for Prince Edward's son during a private gathering at Thornfield Estate. Lord Blackwood was present as a guest, and I observed him having what appeared to be business meetings with individuals I later identified as foreign intelligence operatives." Victoria Sterling objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is hearsay and speculation. My client is entitled to meet his business associates privately without surveillance by paranoid security guards." But Judge Whitmore had read the classified briefings. He knew exactly what was coming. Objection overruled. "Mr. Mitchell, please continue." James activated a high-tech audio system that MI6 technicians had installed in the courtroom. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I will now play recordings made during my official security duties. Recordings that have been verified as authentic by government intelligence experts." The first recording began to play, and Lord Blackwood's voice filled the courtroom with crystal clarity. "The British convoy will be moving through Sector 7 at 04 hours tomorrow. 30 vehicles, mostly supply trucks with minimal escort. Your people will have a clear window for approximately 20 minutes. A foreign-accented voice responded, "Excellent. Lord Blackwood, the final payment of £2 million will be transferred to your Swiss account once the operation is completed." Blackwood's voice again. "Make sure there are no survivors who can identify the leak source. This needs to look like a random Taliban attack, not targeted intelligence." The courtroom was dead silent except for the damning audio. Several jury members gasped audibly, and one woman covered her mouth in horror. This wasn't just corruption, it was cold-blooded murder of British soldiers for money. James's voice was steady but emotional as he explained, "That convoy included my brother's unit. Your Honor, 12 soldiers died in that ambush, including Staff Sergeant David Mitchell, age 28, who left behind a wife and 2 young children." Lord Blackwood tried to stand and speak, but his legs gave out and he collapsed back into his chair. Victoria Sterling looked stunned. Realizing for the first time the true scope of her client's crimes, the recordings continued for nearly 2 hours, revealing a pattern of treachery that spanned 5 years. Blackwood had sold information about troop movements, intelligence operations, diplomatic missions, and weapons shipments. The estimated death toll from his betrayals reached over 50 British servicemen and intelligence agents. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came in the final recording, where Blackwood discussed plans to sell the locations of safe houses used by British agents operating in hostile countries. "Those are the recordings, Your Honor," James concluded. "But the evidence goes beyond audio. MI6 analysis has matched Lord Blackwood's information sales to 17 separate intelligence breaches, 23 military ambushes, and the exposure of 31 undercover agents." Deputy Director Williams stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, on behalf of Her Majesty's Intelligence Services, I can confirm that Mr. Mitchell's evidence has been thoroughly verified. Lord Blackwood's actions constitute the most serious case of treason in modern British history." Victoria Sterling made a desperate final attempt to defend her client. "Your Honor, these recordings could be fabricated. Modern technology allows for sophisticated audio manipulation. Without proper chain of custody procedures, But Judge Whitmore had heard enough. The weight of evidence was overwhelming, and the government's authentication made doubt impossible. Ms. Sterling, your client's voice patterns have been verified by the world's leading audio forensics experts. The recordings are authentic. The evidence is conclusive. Lord Blackwood finally found his voice. But instead of denial, what came out was a broken confession. I never meant for anyone to die. It started small, just selling minor information for money. But they kept demanding more and threatening to expose me if I refused. I got trapped in their web. The pathetic explanation fell on deaf ears. The man who had lived in luxury while British soldiers died for his profit would find no sympathy in that courtroom. Judge Whitmore's verdict was swift and final. Lord Geoffrey Blackwood, you are found guilty of high treason, multiple counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and crimes against the crown. You are sentenced to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. As Blackwood was led away in shackles, James felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served. But it couldn't bring back his brother or the other soldiers who had died because of one man's greed. 6 months later, James Mitchell received the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor, for his courage in exposing the greatest act of treason in modern British history. At the ceremony, attended by the royal family and senior government officials, James dedicated the award to his brother David and all the soldiers who had died because of Blackwood's betrayal. Victoria, Sterling's career never recovered from her association with the case. Though she had unknowingly defended a traitor, her reputation was permanently damaged, and she eventually left the legal profession entirely. James returned to his quiet life, but now with the knowledge that sometimes standing up to authority and breaking rules is the most patriotic thing a person can do. His courage had not only brought justice for his brother, but had prevented countless future deaths by exposing a traitor. At the heart of the British government, the courtroom, where it all happened still, bears a small plaque commemorating the day when one man's dedication to truth overcame the corruption of wealth and power, proving that justice, though sometimes delayed, will ultimately prevail.